Welcome to the Fighter Index, MMA's unofficial fighter scoring system. In this video, we're breaking down a really interesting flyweight matchup between Tim Elliott and Steve Erceg. Elliott brings awkwardness, experience, and one of the most unorthodox styles in the division, while Erceg offers a more composed, technical approach with well-rounded skills across all aspects of this fight. We'll break down their strengths and weaknesses, score their fighting skills in the 4 pillars, talk about their paths to victory, and see who comes out ahead in the Fighter Index. Tim Elliott is one of the most awkward and disruptive fighters in the flyweight division. His game is built around movement, pace, and constant unpredictability. He mixes striking, wrestling, clinch entries, and scrambles in ways that make opponents uncomfortable and force them to react. What makes Elliott dangerous is that he doesn't fight in clean, predictable patterns. He creates weird positions, attacks from odd angles, and turns exchanges into chaos. When he gets opponents chasing or hesitating, he can steal momentum with takedowns, transitions, and relentless activity. Elliott's style can work against him when opponents stay calm and don't get pulled into the mess. Because he takes risks and creates so many scrambles, he can give up position or end up in bad spots. On the feet, his defense can be open, especially against cleaner strikers who pick their shots and stay disciplined. His pace is a weapon, but can also lead to inefficient moments where he's working hard without always gaining control. When opponents slow him down, hold position, and make him pay for mistakes, Elliott's style can become harder to sustain. Steve Erceg is a composed, well-rounded flyweight who fights with structure, timing, and efficiency. On the feet, he's a clean striker who works behind fundamentals, picking his shots and staying disciplined, rather than forcing exchanges or overextending. What separates him is how balanced his game is. He's comfortable striking at range, working in the clinch, or transitioning into grappling without losing control of the fight. He does a good job of staying in position, managing pace, and making opponents fight at his speed. When Erceg is able to keep things orderly and technical, he becomes very difficult to disrupt. Erceg's effectiveness is tied to his ability to control the fight, so when fights become chaotic or unpredictable, it can make him more reactive than proactive. Against fighters who constantly change positions, scramble, or force awkward exchanges, he can be pulled out of his preferred pace. While solid defensively, he can still be drawn into exchanges where opponents land while he's trying to reset. He also isn't built around overwhelming explosiveness, so fighters who push a high pace or create non-stop transitions can make it harder for him to settle into control. When the fight becomes messy instead of technical, his advantages start to narrow a bit. Now it's time to break these fighters down using the Fighter Index scale. We break down each phase of the fight and score each skill to better understand the strengths and the weaknesses of a fighter's game. All Fighter Index scores are based on a scale of 1 to 10. Scores are subjective and can change as a fighter evolves from fight to fight. Here's how the Fighter Index works. Each fighter is evaluated across 4 pillars, made up of 4 key skills. Every skill is scored on a scale from 1 to 10, where 1 represents a non-functional ability and 10 represents a rare or generational skill. Everything in between reflects a fighter's ability in that area. At the end of the video, those scores are combined to calculate the Fighter Index score that shows us how complete each fighter is. Pillar 1, Fight IQ and Athletic Tools. This one's actually pretty close, but the differences are more about how they use their tools. Starting with Fight IQ, Steve Erceg comes in with an 8 compared to Elliott's 7, and that tracks because Erceg is the more structured guy. He stays within himself and makes cleaner decisions while Elliott is more chaotic and unpredictable. Athletically, they're even at 7. Neither guy's relying on crazy explosiveness, but both move well enough to keep up with the pace of a flyweight fight. Stamina, they're also even at 8, and that makes sense because both guys can go, but both can keep working across rounds without falling apart. Then we have Resolve. Elliott gets a slight edge here, 8 to Erceg's 7. That's really about his willingness to stay in the fire, keep scrambling, and push through weird positions. So when you put it all together, Erceg is a little cleaner in how he approaches the fight, but Elliott's pace and grit balance that out. This one's very close, but it slightly leans towards Steve Erceg because of the edge in decision making. Pillar 2, Striking and State of Defense. This is where things start to separate more clearly. In striking, Erceg is at an 8 while Elliott is at a 6, and you can see that right away. Erceg is the more technical, polished striker, while Elliott's striking is more about setting up everything else. In the clinch, they're even at 7. Both guys are comfortable there. Elliott maybe uses it more to transition, while Erceg keeps things tighter and more controlled. Defensively, this is a pretty big gap. Erceg is at a 7 while Elliott is at a 5. Elliott's very hittable, especially when things get messy, while Erceg does a better job of staying in position and not taking unnecessary shots. In chin, they're even at 7, so durability doesn't really separate them here. So this pillar pretty clearly favors Steve Erceg. He's the cleaner striker, he's also a bit harder to hit, which matters a lot in a fight like this. Pillar 3, grappling and control. This is where Elliott starts to make things interesting. In grappling, Elliott is at an 8 compared to Erceg's 7. He's just more active and more willing to create those messy situations. Takedown offense is another clear difference. Elliott scores an 8 and Erceg scores a 6. Elliott is constantly looking to shoot, chain takedown attempts, and mix things up. Top control is close, but Elliott still has the edge, 7-6. He's able to stay busy and make opponents work even when he's not fully settled. In Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, they're even at 8, so both are dangerous if things get technical on the ground. While Erceg is solid across the board, Elliott is just doing more in these situations. More pressure, more attempts, and more chaos, and that's what pushes this pillar towards Tim Elliott. Pillar 4, defense, scrambles, and ground survival. This pillar is a bit more split depending on what kind of positions the fight ends up in. Takedown defense is even at 7, so neither guy clearly controls whether the fight hits the mat. In BJJ defense, Erceg gets a slight edge, an 8 to Elliott's 7. He's a bit tighter and more secure in those more controlled positions. Off the back, they're even at 7, both capable of staying active if they end up there. But in scrambles, Elliott stands out with a 9 compared to Erceg's 7. That's a big difference, and it shows in how often Elliott can turn bad positions into movement and create something out of nothing. So this really comes down to Erceg being safer in his preferred situations versus Elliott being far more dangerous when things break open, and because those scramble moments happen so often in his fights, this pillar leans towards Tim Elliott. When you zoom out and you look at everything across the 4 pillars, this is where the matchup really starts to come into focus. It's not just about who's better in each individual skill, it's about how those abilities play out when both fighters are actively trying to implement their game plan. Who's setting the tempo, who's controlling distance, and which areas of the fight become the deciding factors. Because while this is a competitive matchup on paper, once you connect what each pillar is telling you, you start to get a clearer sense of how the fight is likely to unfold. Pillar 1. Over time, this is where Erceg's approach could start to matter more. With the edge in fight IQ 8-7, he's more likely to keep things measured and make cleaner decisions, especially if the fight slows down and becomes more tactical. In Pillar 2, on the feet, this is Erceg's world if he can keep it there. With an 8 in striking compared to Elliott's 6 and a 7-5 edge in striking defense, he's more likely to win clean exchanges if the fight stays technical. Pillar 3. But once Elliott gets things moving, that's where the fight starts to shift. With an 8 in grappling and an 8 in takedown offense, he's constantly looking to mix things up and pull Erceg into positions he doesn't want to be in. Pillar 4. And this might be where the fight starts to swing. Elliott's 9 in scrambles compared to Erceg's 7 means if things get messy, he's the one more likely to create movement, force reactions, and turn positions into opportunities. So this fight really comes down to Erceg maintaining control versus Elliott trying to create utter chaos. If Erceg can keep it clean and technical, he has the edge, but if Elliott can drag him into scrambles and non-stop transitions, that's where things get a lot more unpredictable. Now we look at both fighters' path to victory based on what we learned from the 4 pillars. Tim Elliott's path to victory is all about making this fight messy, active, and uncomfortable for Steve Erceg. The striking numbers favor Erceg, especially with an 8 in striking compared to Elliott's 6, so Elliott doesn't want a clean kickboxing match. Instead, he needs to lean on the areas where he scores best. His 8 in grappling, 8 in takedown offense, and especially his 9 in scrambles. That means constant level changes, clinch entries, awkward pressure, and forcing Erceg to keep reacting instead of settling into his range. Even with both fighters scoring an 8 in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Elliott's path is not about slow, technical grappling. It's about movement, transitions, and making every exchange hard to read. If he can turn this into a scramble-heavy fight, his pace and unpredictability give him the clearest chance to win. Steve Erceg's path to victory centers on keeping the fight clean, technical, and away from extended scramble-heavy sequences. The biggest advantage for Erceg shows up on his feet, where he scores an 8 in striking compared to Elliott's 6, along with a 7 in striking defense compared to Elliott's 5. That means if Erceg can manage distance, stay composed, and make Elliott pay for awkward entries, he can win with the cleaner exchanges. The key is to not get dragged into Elliott's strongest areas, his 8 in takedown offense and 9 in scrambles. Erceg needs to defend the initial entries, reset back to range, and keep the fight in positions where his timing, accuracy, and decision-making can take over. If he limits the chaos that Elliott is definitely going to try to bring and forces him to strike more than grapple, the matchup starts to favor his cleaner skill set. Now when you put everything together across the 4 pillars, this one ends up being extremely tight on paper. We know exactly where Tim Elliott and Steve Erceg are dangerous and where they're vulnerable. This is where it all comes together. The individual scores are combined to give each fighter a single fighter index score, giving a clear snapshot of who's more complete across every phase of the fight. Tim Elliott comes in with a fighter index score of 7.3, while Steve Erceg is right there at 7.2. And that gap really reflects where their strengths come from. Elliott's score is driven by his activity in grappling and that 9 in scrambles, while Erceg's numbers are built more around his striking, defense, and ability to manage exchanges cleanly. So even with Elliott holding a slight edge in the numbers, this fight feels like it comes down to who can pull it into their kind of fight first, whether that's Elliott creating movement and constant transitions, or Erceg keeping things measured and picking his shots. And that's the full breakdown for Tim Elliott versus Steve Erceg using the fighter index. This is one of those matchups where the numbers are close, but the fight itself could look very different depending on who gets their game going first. Now I want to hear from you. Who do you think takes it? And is there a skill you'd score differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let's get into it. And if you're enjoying these breakdowns, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more fighter index analysis. See you on the next one.